thank you to all of you for joining Ahmad and myself for our tech session on resting your custom web apps securely on ArcGIS web services.
Absolutely. Today, Kristian and I will be taking you on a tour of custom app development in the ArcGIS system. We'll start by sharing how REST services form the backbone of app development. From there, we'll take a look at some of the options that you, as users of the system, have access to build your own custom applications. These include Experience Builder, the JavaScript SDK, and even some third-party plugins. After that, we'll have a look at some demos. We'll build our very own custom application from scratch using the JavaScript SDK. And then we'll round out by taking a look at some of the latest features in the 4.29 release. So, with all that to look forward to, I'll hand it over to Kristian to tell us more about REST services.
Thank you, Ahmad. When they told us about the topic for our session, they also asked us to introduce ArcGIS REST services. And to be honest, my initial reaction was, no way. That's not because I don't like the REST API. No, quite the opposite. If it would be me, I think we should dedicate a full session to it. That's how important it is, right? They're absolutely fundamental to the way we do WebGIS. And because it is so important, we did agree to have a short introduction on ArcGIS REST services. Conceptually, they sit right at the bottom of the ArcGIS product food chain. All our products use them, and so do you when you use our products. Let me show you what I mean. Here we are in ArcGIS Online on a feature service item, and I'm going to open up the developer tools that are a little smaller, and maybe zoom out a tiny bit. There we go. I'll update the description for this item. Hello AC, hit save. And we can see here a request was being sent. If I click on this and again, zoom down a tiny bit. Sorry, it's really small. Maybe I can zoom out a bit further. Here we are. It sent the request to ArcGIS Online, my content, the item, and this update operation. On the payload, you can see all the information that was passed on, such as the description, hello AC, and the token, and some other information that's less relevant to us just now. That is it. That is ArcGIS REST for you, right? It's just HTTP requests that we send to servers, and we get back information. And as you can imagine, right, this is used all around the system. Portal, server, AGOL, everything is using it to communicate, to either update information or get back information. Thankfully, you won't have to use it directly too often yourself. And that is because we've built these nice wrappers around it, such as your ArcGIS Online frontend, where you click buttons and the magic happens behind the scene, or things like the ArcGIS API for Python, which has lots of functions that replicate these operations. In fact, if you have spent any sort of time with the documentation of the ArcGIS API for Python, you'll see it quite often it cross-references the REST documentation. And that, as I said, they do relate really closely. Hands up, who of you has been on this page before? Yep, good, fair few of us. Keep your hands up if you felt imposter syndrome kick in because we are feeling quite self-aware of the fact that there's a lot of text and it's difficult. I'm glad I'm not alone, a few of us. It's, a lot of information. There's very detailed descriptions on the parameters and a lot to take in, but it's worth it, right? This is the place where you want to go if you need to understand what's happening at the most fundamental level. If you have a sync issue or you want to understand replicas or a query, such as what we have here on screen, this is where it tells you all about it. Let's have a closer look at this query operation. Back in ArcGIS Online, I'm going to close the DevTools and scroll right to the bottom of my item to this URL, which takes us to the REST services directory. This is a front end where we can navigate the REST API. And on this OS OpenStreet layer, we have a road layer. And you have a lot of information presented, the drawing info, the individual fields, and right at the bottom, we have the available operations. So here's our query operation. This form is where you can build up your own REST request. So it's a quite nice way of exploring and interacting with the REST API. What I want to find out is what kind of roads there are, right? I saw there was a class field, which I guess describes like the type of road. I know there's A roads, there's B roads, but maybe there's other values. So let's try to find out the unique values for the class field. I'm going to build this up really quickly, so I'll type in 1 = 1 in the where statement to get back all the features. Then I'm going to set return geometry to false, because I'm not interested in the geometry. That will make my query much faster. I'll ask it to return the class field. And finally, I'm going to only return distinct values. And as you can see, there's so many more properties. It's a really powerful tool to extract information from your data. When I'm done, I hit query, and this will return after a second. It goes through over 3 million features on this layer. It returns the 7 results we have for the class. So there's also motorways and unclassified and whatnot. That was only the surface of what the query operation can do. But there's so much more just to feature services itself, right? You could create a layer view. You could create a replica. You can download your data in different formats. And the best part, it's all open, right? Anyone who has access to this service endpoint can go in and perform these requests. So if you have a workflow, say a Power Automate workflow, and you want to retrieve data or get information from a service, you can just hook this query operation in there, get data back, and then work with it outside the Esri system. And speaking of outside systems and apps and other things, let's let the REST API sit by the side for a moment while I talk through the different options we have for building custom apps with these web services. First and foremost, we have the ArcGIS Experience Builder application, which lets you build out-of-the-box, no-code applications using lots of widgets and really advanced user interfaces with multiple views and maps and lots of great features. But there's a dedicated talk for that later in this room at 10 to 3, so please attend that if you want to hear a detailed overview on that. What I just want to touch on is the Developer Edition, which lets you extend ArcGIS Experience Builder beyond what's there out of the box. So you can build your own custom widgets, and you can build your own themes and share them with your organization to bring in this business logic that you have and combine it with the out-of-the-box solution. There's a lot of tech behind this, so we've got a whole bunch of Experience Builder specific technologies, but also modern web technologies such as React and TypeScript. So if you already know those, you'll have a really good time getting started with Experience Builder. Next up, we have the Maps SDK for JavaScript. The Maps SDK is amazing if you want to build your own custom apps from scratch, no framework requirements. You could build them in React or completely just vanilla JavaScript. And yeah, you can make sure that you really meet those user requirements you have to a T. It is probably the most powerful mapping library out there. It receives 3 updates every year, and with every update it gets more powerful and new features, and it's really developing so rapidly. And the best part, it's free, right? Anyone can use it. You just download it, and you can start building apps. And with the detailed documentation we have, with lots of guides and samples, it has never been more easy to get started, as Ahmad will show us in a second. Finally, we have third-party plugins that we have developed for other mapping libraries, such as Cesium or MapLibre, Leaflet, and some others. These plugins let you integrate ArcGIS REST services and things like our geocoding API or our routing API into these other mapping libraries. You can utilize a lot of the ArcGIS features in them as well. And with that, over to you, Ahmad.
Thank you, Kristian. So we've just heard how the JavaScript SDK is Esri's most powerful custom mapping solution. So in this demo, we'll be building a brand new application from scratch using the SDK. The first thing I'm going to do is visit developers.arcgis.com, where I can access the documentation. Now, the documentation has a wealth of resources for navigating the SDK, and that's why we'll be referring to it often throughout these demos. Now, if I'm building my first ever application, I may want to start with a plain 2D map and build up from there. So let me visit the sample code and click Intro to Map View 2D. Here, I'm presented with all the code I need to create a blank 2D mapping application. So I'll go ahead and copy that code, go over to my code editor, and paste it in. And on the left, I can see the result of what I've just done. Voila, a brand new 2D map. Now, let's bring this a bit closer to home by changing some of the values in the map view, such as the zoom and center values. If I go ahead and just change those, you'll see what I've done is brought us into the QE2 conference center where we are today. Now, for a bit more customization, I may want to change the base map. So I'll find that base map value that I've copied in, and I'll replace it with dark gray vector. And there we have it, the conference center against a beautiful dark base map. But let's go further. Let's bring data into the application. Let's say I want to find out more about what's around me and maybe make decisions as a result. Well, let's go back to our trusty documentation. On the left, in Layers and Intro to Feature Layer, I can see the code I need to add to my script to bring in a public feature layer. So here's the code structure. And instead of pointing it towards this feature layer that they're showing us, I'm going to bring in a feature layer that I found earlier, which has all the green spaces in London. So maybe after the conference, I want to visit a park. Let's see where those are. I've added that in following the same structure I saw in the sample code. But I need to make one more addition. I need to update what's called the require statement. And this effectively tells my code what functions to bring in from the SDK. So all I'm doing here is adding feature layer at the end of my require statement. Again, we're adding a feature layer, so my code needs to know that it needs to bring in the feature layer function from the SDK. And there we have it, the green spaces lighting up the conference center around us. But you may have heard that I mentioned this is the code you need to bring in a public feature layer. What if I have some data or layers inside my ArcGIS Online account that I don't want to make public, but I also want to add them to my map? Well, the process isn't that different. I'll go ahead and bring in a layer that's in my ArcGIS Online account. Again, it's following the same structure as that green spaces layer. So I'll make some space and add in that new layer, but it's a vector tile layer. So the same way I added feature layer to my require statement earlier, I'm going to add vector tile layer at the end as well. Again, so my code knows what functions to bring in. And when I hit save, I can now see that I'm being prompted for my ArcGIS Online login credentials. Because if you remember, I mentioned that this vector tile layer is secured behind my ArcGIS Online account. So once I provide my username and password, I can then see my map with the public layer and that private vector tile layer. And as I zoom out, I can see that it's the London Underground network. So hopefully that shows you how you can bring data into your application. We'll leave it there for now, and I'll pass it back to Kristian, but when we come back, we'll add some more functionality to this map. So over to you, Kristian.
Thanks, Ahmad. That was a really powerful demonstration of how easy it is to get started with the Maps SDK. I mentioned earlier there's 3 releases every year, and it can be quite difficult to stay on top of all the latest new features. So Ahmad and I decided to give you a quick rundown on some of our favorite new features. And what better place to do this than the release notes for 4.29, our latest release. And right at the top, you can see we have Maps components. These are not new with this release, but they're still fairly new, so you might not have heard of them. What is a web component? Think of it like your normal HTML components, like a div element, but they bring in custom logic, such as your web map logic from the Maps SDK, and make them available as a HTML component. So all you have to do is type in your web map, and with one line of code, the web map will appear. There's a long list of components, and there's more being added all the time, and it's definitely the direction forward for the Maps SDK, so I highly encourage you to check them out. One of my favorite new features are the hit test improvements, and more specifically, the vector tile layer hit test. What is a hit test? It's a bit complex to explain, but let me try anyway. Imagine you have a stack of paper, which are your layers on your web map, and you take a needle, and you go to a location and you pierce right through all those papers. That's your hit test. And what it returns is the attributes and the geometries for all those different layers you went through. It's a really nice way of working with your layers to get back information, for instance, from a cursor position. However, until now, this was only available for feature layers. With the latest release, we can perform these hit tests on vector tile layers, which might not sound like much, but it's really useful when you have big data sets. Think millions of features that would be really slow to render otherwise. Now you can publish a vector tile service from them, enable the attributes, and then you get that information back just like a feature service. Take it a step further, think your master map, base map. You can publish that, enable the attributes, and then you get back information like building heights or tree width or whatever you want from the data of your master map. Finally, I think we're running short on time, and you see there's so many other features I would love to talk about, but one I really enjoy are the custom render nodes. They use the WebGL level access to really help you bring your 3D scenes alive. You can do amazing things such as have your turbines rotate if you have like 3D turbine symbols, or you could have camera lens effects such as this depth of field effect we create by updating focus distance and aperture. And really with WebGL level access, it is there's no limits. Like your creativity is the limit. Anything goes. It's quite spectacular. There's lots of samples here as well, so yeah, please check them out in your own time. And with that, over to you, Ahmad.
Thank you, Kristian. Okay, so we've just seen the wealth of new features that were released in the last release. Let's have a look at maybe implementing some of them into our application. So here we have the application that we built earlier. Now, let me go ahead and actually visit the same application, but one in which I've implemented the hit testing code. Now, if you want to see how to do that, the sample code is in the documentation as we've seen already. And now, as I travel my cursor along any of these lines, I can see immediate dynamic feedback from that vector tile there. In this case, it's the name of the London Underground line and also whether it's in service or not. And this is applying to every single line in my London Underground. So as I'm navigating around the map, I'm getting that contextual awareness of where I am and what's around me without having to put in the effort of probing that information. So that's really convenient and really useful. Now, something else that got a major revamp in the latest release is the mapping component functionality, which is a relatively new bit of functionality. And it allows you to build brand new maps and add really powerful features more easily than ever. So here I am in the Display a Map component tutorial. And what I'm going to do is scroll down, and as we've been doing already so far, and as every good developer does, I'm going to go ahead and copy that sample code. And I'm going to bring it into my code editor just to show you how easily we can make a brand new mapping application using components. So I'll bring in a brand new text HTML file, hit save, and then we'll see on the left those changes. Now that's the map that was used in the sample code, but I'm going to go ahead and bring that map that we made earlier into this, and all I have to do is update that item ID. And once I've done that, this is the item ID of the map that we've just made that I've saved in my ArcGIS Online account. And now it's immediately visible with just 2 lines of code. The rest is all boilerplate. So there we have the QE2 conference sensor and all the public green spaces lighting up around it. Let's go a little bit further and add some more components and see how we can make this app more useful. To do that, I'm going to visit the component story map. This has a list of all the components that are available to me. And one of the newest components that was added in the latest release is this directional pad component. By scrolling down, I have some options to toggle the functionality or the appearance of this component. I'd like this D-pad to be in the bottom left of my map. And when I hit show code, it shows me exactly what code I need to add inside my map component to get that bit of functionality. So I'll paste it in, hit save, and now we can see, just like that, I have a fully functioning D-pad without any effort from my own side, which is amazing. But let's go one step further and see one more widget that I can add in from the latest release. Now, the editor widget, it isn't new, but it's gotten a nice little revamp in the latest release. So as I've done, I'm going to hit show code, see those 2 lines I need to bring in, hit copy, and bring them into my map components. And once I hit save and come back to my application, there it is, a fully functioning editor. Now, to see the new feature that was added, I'm going to enable tooltips and start editing. And when I do that, I have the option to press the tab button, and I can start editing with constraints. And what that means is I can start determining the distance of each of the features I add. So I can make precise additions without reducing the risk of human error. So if I'm maybe adding something to the map that's following a very specific brief, I can start editing with these constraints. I can also determine as well as the distance, I can also determine the deflection. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can make a perfect square without the need for perfect manual dexterity. So I'm just adding 90-degree angles and specific widths. And just like that, a perfect square without anyone questioning how perfect it really is. I added that little bit at the end, but you get it. But I think that's all we have time for. But I really hope this has shown you how easily you can create your own custom applications using a variety of tools available to you. And it's really not that difficult to get started. And you can expand what we've shown you so much further to really make these applications your own and make them incredibly powerful. If you have any more questions for us, you can find either of us in the tech zone after this talk. But from both me and Kristian, we thank you for your time.